Oh man, that thing looks badass. Look at this thing. Welcome to episode 7 of this 4-wheel underground solid axle swap on a 3rd generation Toyota 4Runner. In this episode, a whole lot of things happen, so I'm actually going to use a cheat sheet to remember everything we actually do in this episode. This is a very important episode, so you're definitely going to want to watch this one, especially if you plan on doing this job yourself. To start off with, we needed to cut out the original transmission crossmember to make room for the lower link brackets, which also double as a mounting point for the 4-wheel underground transmission skid plate. Then we get the lower links tacked in place on the frame. We get the upper link bracket affixed to the driver's side lower link bracket. And then we also get the upper link bracket tacked in place onto the top of the truss that goes over the pumpkin of the front axle. We get the hydraulic ram plate built and installed onto the front axle. We cut out holes in the front fenders to make room for the coilover shock towers. We show you how to get the transmission skid plate built and installed. We show you how we get the shock tower tubes welded in and also getting the upper and lower coilover mounts welded in properly. We show you how we went about getting the proper location of the shock tower plates that weld onto the front of each frame rail. Those shock tower frame plates also support the panhard bracket and also support the bump stop cans. We then get the front axle back underneath the rig. We get the pitman arm installed, the drag link installed, the tie rod installed. We get the knuckles back on with the ball joint delete kit. We get the front axles installed. Then we get the front hubs with the unit bearings installed. We get the Warn locking hubs installed. We get the Radflow coilovers charged with nitrogen and those properly installed. We get the Willwood front brakes installed. And finally, we get the Method wheels installed with 40-inch tires on them. And we get the rig settled on its own weight. So this episode is a huge accomplishment for us, getting that front axle all properly set up and the front suspension all dialed in and ready to go. So I recommend that you don't skim through this, especially if you are going to be installing a 4-wheel underground kit on your vehicle. Without further ado, let's get started with the work.
Okay, we're gonna get this transmission crossmember out. Gotta just take the bolts out of the bottom of the transmission mount, the exhaust hanger bolts out, and then go from there.
See what you got.
It's a new Milwaukee Fuel 3/8 drive ratchet. Pretty powerful. Love this thing. This new Milwaukee ratchet is pretty darn powerful. Way more powerful than the original ones we had years ago. They've made some big improvements. Pretty sweet. These 14 millimeter bolts are kind of in there pretty tight. That one's under tension still. There we go.
That's one way to do it.
Now what we have to do is we have to cut these transmission frame mount brackets off of the frame to make room for the 4-wheel underground brackets.
Well, these are the lower link brackets. The skid plate / transmission mount attaches right here.
Oh, okay. Time for some Milwaukee hacksaw action and some Milwaukee angle grinder action to get those off. And some sanding, maybe with the die grinder, probably a multitude of tools. Okay, we got the transmission crossmember frame brackets off the frame rails on both sides. This is the passenger and that is the driver. And now we're gonna put the four-wheel underground lower link brackets onto the frame.
So basically, we need to be 1.5 inches from the edge of this hole to the edge of this bracket right here. So that bracket gets mounted forward of that hole towards the engine.
Because of a clearance issue, we have to cut off this exhaust hanger on the exhaust because the bracket's gonna go right here and this is gonna interfere. So he's gonna chop that off with a Milwaukee hacksaw. Chris also had to trim a little bit of the heat shield out of the way. He's gonna clean it up with the Milwaukee die grinder.
Okay, so from this side of the hole, that's the engine that way. We're measuring 1.5 inches. Then this should sit about right there, 1.5 inches.
So that's your guide. So the back part of the lower link bracket is gonna be right equal to that line.
Yep.
So what Chris is gonna do is gonna hold the bracket up to the frame and I'm gonna trace it. This way we know where we need to clean up the metal so we can tack it in place. What we're realizing is if we want to weld the very top of this bracket to the frame, the height of the bracket is such that it goes pretty much level with the top or maybe a little bit over. And we realize there's no way we're going to be able to weld that. So we're probably going to take about 1/2 inch off that top section of the bracket to where then we could weld it to the top of the frame and we'll be able to make it much stronger by having a weld up there rather than no weld at all. Now Chris is making the 1.5 inch mark from that hole on the driver's side. We're gonna put the bracket up there and trace it to where we know where to clean off the metal to get ready to tack it in place. All right, so we're gonna be using some dueling die grinders with sanding discs to clean off the frame to where we can get some decent welds. Some of the areas need angle grinder with a sandy disc because it's too tight to get in here with this right angle die grinder. So Chris is just now marking the plate to see what it's going to look like if we cut that much off. He's marking it 3/8 from the top.
I think 3/8 is a good number.
All right, Chris has the brackets marked. He's going to use the Milwaukee angle grinder with a cutting disc to take that material off. Chris is cutting the other bracket. I'm gonna work on cleaning up the one he just cut with the die grinder. Now that we have the pieces cleaned up, we're fitting this upper link bracket onto the driver's side lower link bracket, and we're figuring out where we need to clean off the metal there to where we can tack it in place. Our plan is just to tack that upper link bracket to the lower link bracket and then tack that assembly up onto the frame on both sides and then get the axle in place and get all the fitment that we want. And then once we got that all dialed in, we're gonna take these brackets off the frame by cutting the tack welds, so then we can thoroughly weld on the upper link brackets, and then we'll put the brackets back on the frame and finish the welding. That is our plan. All right, Chris is gonna tack the upper link bracket on. We have the bracket attached to the frame rail with 3 C-clamps, and this back side has a pretty sizable gap, so you have to use a C-clamp to bend this back side of the bracket in towards the frame rail. Took quite a bit of force, but not horrible. And so we're gonna tack that in place so we maintain that bend in the bracket, and then we're gonna tack it in other places too. All right, you saw us do it on the driver's side. We're gonna do the same procedure on the passenger side. Just get enough tack welds on to where it will hold while we're making sure everything is fitting right before we do the final welding. Chris and I are deciding to remove this section of the exhaust because it's gonna improve our ability to get better welds on this passenger side. So if the exhaust pipe is out of the way, we'll just be able to get a better angle with the welding tip and hopefully get some nice welds.
Okay, if you grab this end, I'll get this out of the hanger.
Nice. Oh, it's easy. All right, this is a big moment. We're rolling the front axle underneath the rig. Ah!
You right?
Yeah. Don't do that at home,
Did it
kids.
smash your hand?
A little bit. This is gonna be a backbreaker, especially for Chris, because he's on the heavy side. Lift with your legs, not your back.
2, 3. Oh my gosh. Now let's get these lower links hooked up, I guess.
We're gonna get the back connection in first.
The frame connection.
Tap that, baby. There it goes.
1 down, 1 to go, bro.
There we go.
Right there.
Now that we have the front axle under the rig, we're checking out where the panhard bar would be sitting based off of how far forward we have the axle currently. This is where you really gotta pay attention to how the axle is gonna interface with everything on the vehicle, the oil pan, the frame. So as part of that process, we're gonna fit the panhard bar in place kind of in the area where we think it's gonna end up. Right now we have this bracket that's gonna be eventually welded onto the driver's side frame, clamped in place. And we're gonna then get the panhard bar in and just see how everything is looking.
Okay, so now that we got the panhard bar in and we pretty much determined full bump, which is essentially 3/4 of an inch between the frame and the panhard bar and 3/4 of an inch between the oil pan and the panhard bar. We also then checked for the clearance around the upper link bracket from the engine mount and the engine itself, and we determined a good location to tack that in. And so now we're gonna lower the axle to where we think about ride height is, which is roughly 5 to 6 inches below full bump, and then we'll get the upper link bracket tacked in. And then once we get the upper link bracket tacked on, then we'll get the panhard bracket tacked on. And essentially the way you line up the panhard bracket is this is where the bump can goes, and this is where the landing pad for the bump is. And so you want this to sort of be centered in that bump can. We mocked up the upper link roughly, and it seemed like we didn't need a whole lot of adjustment. Basically, this pulls out so you can extend the upper link if you need to, quite a large distance, but it didn't seem like we really needed much. And based on the pictures on 4-Wheel Underground's website, it seems like most people kind of just tack it like this. Just enough to kind of weld it outside of where the TIG weld is right here.
Okay, so it looks like about a 1/4 inch down below the TIG weld.
Put something to cover your heim joint. You also don't want to leave the thread exposed. This is just for when you weld it mostly, but I don't really want to get any spatter on the heim joint even just from the tack, so that's why I put some tape over it. Okay, and then we also kind of roughly mocked up the upper link just to make sure that it would be good in this spot, and it does seem like it'll be good where we have it. If you look at these little side wings that come with the upper link, you pretty much have to locate it in this spot, because if you go further this way, it's gonna be off the side, and if you go further the other way, it's gonna cover the hole for the breather. So we're gonna get this tacked in right here.
We were gonna get the panhard bar reconnected with the bracket on the driver's side, but then Chris came up with a good idea on how to proceed to get the front axle and the steering all set up. What is that idea?
So basically we want to push the axle as far forward as we can without having any steering interference. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to put the knuckles back on, get the tie rod and drag link and pitman arm installed, and then we'll try to push the axle as far forward as we can without having any steering interference. And then we'll mock up the panhard bar. That'll kind of give us a better location of where to tack the frame panhard bar bracket in place.
I think that is a solid plan, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so with this ball joint delete kit, they come with these little spacers to replace the stock ones. You basically just have to kind of line this opening, try to center it, you know, this direction.
Perpendicular?
Perpendicular. And then you kind of just mark it where you're going to need to cut it. And then you cut it and get it to fit.
So you just basically have to clearance that.
To where this will sit flat with this.
Okay.
We'll do that on both the spacers, and then we should be able to get the knuckles set in the axle. Got the Milwaukee right angle die grinder.
All right, let's see how Chris did. Let's see if this thing slides in. Nope, not quite. Yeah, not much more. Maybe a 30-second. All right, so Chris is gonna get the knuckle onto the passenger side. Is that getting heavy? Where's the nut?
Up top. There you go.
So what are you tightening right now?
So we're tightening the bottom nut on this ball joint that we could have tightened basically after we pressed them in. I don't really have an exact spec I'm going to. We're not really tightening everything down to spec right now. We're just kind of getting it all snug so that we can get these knuckles in.
Oh, so that has an Allen head in the stud?
Yeah, to make it so that it doesn't spin when you tighten it.
What size is that?
5/16.
5/16. So now you're tightening that nut to the German spec of good and tight. Well, that's sucking it up there.
I think the bottom just sucked up too.
So we'll come back with some torque values for this ball joint delete kit when we do the final assembly. So we're gonna do the same with the passenger side.
Okay, now we got both knuckles kind of loosely mocked up. We're gonna go ahead and get the tie rod bar in place.
There it is. Yes.
And then now we got to get this frickin' thing in here.
Pitman arm?
Yeah. Guess we'll just assume that it's in the neutral position.
What's the next step? The drag link?
Yep. What do you think about that, Timmy?
It's starting to look like something. All right, so we now have both knuckles on, the tie rod, the pitman arm, the drag link. All right, Chris is gonna raise up the axle so we can see how everything's looking at this point. We've got the panhard bracket attached to the driver frame with a couple C-clamps. And then on the other side, we have the bump stop bracket and coilover hoop bracket attached with another C-clamp. Now we're gonna get the panhard bar attached and see how that's looking. All right, so Chris and I cycled the axle up and down a bunch of times, and we finally agree that we have the axle in the position we want in regards to how far forward it's gonna sit on the vehicle. So we marked where we need to clean up the metal to where we'll be able to weld it. And at first we're just gonna tack this in place and then complete the welding later on. And then another thing we figured is that currently where the lower link brackets are on the frame, our plan is to move it forward by 3/4 of an inch, because right now we have the Heims adjusted out by 12 full turns. And to get more Heim thread engagement, we believe it's going to be better to just move the brackets 3/4 of an inch forward. So we'll still have some adjustment forward and backwards, but it's going to give us a lot more thread engagement, which we believe is going to be stronger. Okay, so we're going to get our Milwaukee die grinders out and start cleaning up the metal. All right, we're going to tack on the panhard bracket on the driver's side, and that also doubles as the shock hoop mount, right?
The shock hoop mount and the bump stop mount. All right, we're all tacked in. Now we're gonna get the other side tacked in. Okay, so we pretty much got the center of the bump stop mount centered with the bump stop pad. And we also made sure that the panhard bar clears this inside corner so it has an extra little bit of clearance. And so we're gonna go ahead and get this side tacked in now. All right, so this is the Hydro Assist ram guard. We're just gonna tack all these little tabs in place for now. There is 2 other pieces that go with this that basically hold the ram, and so these kind of go like this. But we're just gonna get these tacked in to hold them in place for right now. Okay, so you're gonna take your Hydro Assist ram, and basically I just got a couple turns out on each side just so I have a little bit of adjustment. You're gonna hook that up to the knuckle that we welded earlier, and we're gonna put these together on this end made like a little spacer out of some aluminum. I did aluminum can before, but that wasn't really thick enough. And so since we don't want to use up the nylock on this nut, we're just going to stack a couple washers. Doesn't have to be super tight, barely finger tight, enough to move it around. Okay, so essentially the next step is to make sure your knuckle is turned all the way full stop. You also want the ram to be fully compressed. So basically it's pulled as far towards the driver as it's gonna ever be. Here, let's look at a picture just so we're not like being full retards.
I concur. So what do you think? Just put a tack in the front there or try to get one in the back too?
Just put it on the two corners on the back. Just situate it one last time before you go for it. Good. All right, so now we got these brackets tacked in, and it'd be pretty hard to get this weld while this was mounted to the axle, so we figured it'd be better to get it while it's off the rig. All right, so now we got these tabs welded in, and now we're gonna go ahead and weld all these little tab and slots and these corner reliefs before we get it on the axle, just because it's probably easier to weld these right side up than upside down. Here we go.
Getting the ram guard welded on for good. Got it in position. See what Timmy's got. Let Timmy weld. Here's the hydraulic assist ram guard all burned in.
Right now we're working on figuring out how much of the fender we need to cut out for the coilover tower and for the coilover. We're using part of the coilover tower to get a rough estimate of where we need to cut the fender so we make the clearance but don't cut too much material out. We're moving some things, and one of the things that needs to be moved is the igniter. Earlier in the video series, we already removed the cruise control unit that's in this area, and then we removed the ABS module too. So a lot of the stuff has already been removed.
Okay, now we got these holes cut for the tube for the coilover tower, and now we're just gonna cut between the two, start making room for the coilovers themselves. Okay, so we've pretty much articulated the axle up and down on both sides and straight up and down a bunch, and we feel pretty confident in where this upper link mount is, especially considering that the wings make it so you can't really go anywhere else except for right there. So we're gonna burn this upper link in.
We've got the upper link welded to the top of the front differential, and then now we're gonna fit the wings on, which are reinforcements for the upper link. But once you have the wings on, those welds that we just did are hidden by the wings. So you want to weld those first and then put the wings on. Maybe spin it a tiny bit faster.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Faster.
Okay, so the first step of getting the skid plate together is we got to weld all these little weld nuts. They have this little circle and it basically just fits right in the holes on the skid plate. These 3 holes on the outside get these tubes for some through bolts, but we're gonna not worry about those right this second. First, we're gonna get all these nuts kind of tacked in place. There's about 5 of these nuts. You kind of have to worry about the orientation. This little piece right here goes over, and so it has to line up with the slot on the piece. And then this one, probably gonna want it to follow this piece right here basically. These 3 right here, you kind of want them the diamond shape, and then this one, you want it square with the piece, and then up here, same thing, you want it square with the piece that fits in so that it'll go in the little slot.
You're gonna tack those nuts on all 4 sides, correct?
I think I'm gonna tack most of them on all 4 sides, like this one, and then this one way over here.
Just 2 sides.
I'll probably just do 2 sides to make sure that it fits with those pieces. And maybe these, I might leave the tack off of this side for these 2 as well, because there's a triangle that fits right in here too. This thing fits right in here.
All right, so we're gonna get welding. All right, Chris has all of the nuts tacked on the inside of the skid plate, and on to the next step. The next thing we're gonna weld on are these spacers, and we're using the bolt and a nut to hold it square with the skid plate, and Chris is gonna do his best to get as much weld around the circumference as he can.
I'm probably just gonna tack it with the bolts in, and then I'll probably weld it.
Oh, so you're gonna tack it first and then take the bolts out, okay.
Yeah.
Now that Chris has all of the spacers tacked in, he's gonna weld around the circumference as best he can. All right, Chris has all of the spacers welded in. Chris is now fitting in some of the other pieces that are gonna be welded onto the inside of the skid plate. They have little tabs that interface with slots, and he's just figuring out all the puzzle pieces right now. Because those pieces have to interface with the other side of the skid plate, we can't actually tack those in place. Those are just gonna be welded on the bottom side where the slots go through. Next, Chris is gonna fit the top piece on and align all the tabs with the other side of the skid plate and get it all oriented, and then we can start welding that. Now we're gonna put a bunch of tacks in here, and once that's all done, then we'll get to welding the complete thing. To give you a better close-up of where we're gonna be welding, we have to weld all those tabs. That's gonna hold those inner plates on the inside firm, and then we're just gonna weld around the perimeter everywhere we can. So a whole lot of welding. And Chris is being generous and he's letting me do a little bit of welding. Thanks, Chris.
All right, so we got all these little corner pieces, and they all fit in to these corners right here. We got one fitted up right there. There's not really any tab and slot on this, so you're gonna have to kind of just get it to sit where you want it. Kind of slides down and slides around, but just try to get it fitted up as best you can, and then get it burned in. All right, so I just got these little corner pieces go right in this section right here, and I just got it fitted up with this little swivel magnet. Works pretty good. We're gonna get that tacked in, and then we'll get the other side tacked in. Okay, so we got the axle at what we think is full bump. We got about a 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch on the driver's side, a little bit more on the passenger side, but the axle's level. And then Brian from 4-Wheel Underground said to leave 1.5 inches of shock shaft showing, which we have right here at full bump, to leave room for the bump stop full compression. And so now that we have that, we can get these upper and lower mounts where we want them to be. And so the nice thing about this upper adjustable shock hoop is we can just kind of move this lower mount to where we want it to be, get this tacked in, and then we can get the upper mount tacked in based on where this is.
We didn't show the welding of this lower coilover mount, but it's 4 pieces, and we'll just give you a shot of what it looks like so you can mimic it, but it's not a hard thing to put together.
Okay, so now I'm gonna push the shock up to about where we want it to live, and Tim's gonna adjust the pipe clamp so that that upper tube will hold the shock in place of where we want the lower shock mount on the axle to live.
Is that where you want it?
That's where we want it.
Okay. Okay, the hose clamp is bottomed out. I'll tighten it up. Okay, that's in place.
One other thing that you want to make sure of is that your caster adjustment on your axle is where you want it to be based on your ride height, which is about 8 to 10 degrees, because that'll affect the rotation of the axle for where these mounts are welded on. Okay, so now that we got the upper mount positioned about where we want it, we just got to kind of slide this into place. And as you can see, there's kind of like a little groove in here that really fits on the axle inner C. We'll be able to just kind of get it locked into place, and then just kind of want to level it out a bit to make it exactly how we want it. And then I'm just going to get a magnet on here. But that is about how we want it to be, pretty much right there. All right, I think we're all tacked in. Now that the lower mount is tacked in place, the axle is where we want it as far as full bump. We have this tube at the correct height. Now we just need to turn it to get it to where we want it to live, and make sure that this is straight with the mount so that the shock can flex in and out as it goes through its full articulation, and then we'll get that tacked in place. And the other thing you want to make sure is it doesn't matter if the shock body is straight, and what matters is that the mount itself is straight. And now that we got that where we want it to be, we can tack it in. I'm only gonna do one tack because we're gonna need to take this tube out later and cut the tube down and then bevel the end so that we get a nice weld in there. But this is just for basically flex testing and making sure everything is how we want it to be before we do final welding. And that's all it takes. Okay, so now we're gonna get the driver's side done the same as the passenger side, and then we'll flex test this axle out before final welding. Okay.
All right, let's do some flexing.
All right, so now we got the axle pretty much fully flexed out. Full bump on the passenger side, full droop on the driver's side, and everything is looking good. There's no binding anywhere. The tire's able to spin from the clearance that we did on the fenders. Everything's looking really good. We're probably gonna take the tire off the passenger side and put it on the driver's side, drop the passenger side down, raise the driver's side up, see how that looks, and hopefully we're happy with it.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so now that we tested full compression with both sides up, flex tested each side individually, we're happy with how the panhard mount is, the shock coilover towers, everything seems to be working and not binding. And so we're gonna go ahead and burn everything in the front in. We're pretty much dialed in exactly how we want it. The only thing left is just to set the bump stops, but that's pretty much exactly where we had the coilovers. We're just gonna put the bump stops in and we'll show that in a second. But everything is pretty much good to go where we have it. So we're gonna go ahead and burn everything in.
So more welding practice for Chris and Timmy. We're gonna cut the pipes, do some grinding to bevel it, and then get these things completely welded up and ready to reinstall on the truck. All right, so Chris used the Milwaukee angle grinder to cut off the pipe. Now he's working on putting a bevel on it with his Milwaukee die grinder. So again, when he welds it inside here, he can get a more effective weld and still not have the weld sticking way up above this surface. How you feeling, Darth Vader? Luke, I'm your father.
Okay, so we got the axle at full compression right now, and we're not gonna be able to mount these bump stops until we get the coilover shock towers all welded in, because we're gonna have a fun time welding these bump stops in, but I'd rather the coilover mounts have a nice bead here. I'm gonna mark these bump cans, and then we're gonna be able to pull the axle and tack these in after the fact. And this side, I kind of got it marked driver side, and I did a little outline, and it's kind of just gonna go just like that. Wanted to keep the rad flow in front because it does lock it in with that little nut right there. And the other side's gonna be way easier because the bottom of this little triangle right here is gonna mate up to the bottom of this bump can. Whereas this one, it gets lifted up maybe like 1/4 of an inch above this, and so we're just going to kind of chop the corner off a little bit and mount it a little bit higher up. That's why I have this one marked up, basically, so we know exactly where it's going to go. And we want to pull the axle so that we'll have an easier time welding these coilover mounts, and then we can paint the whole axle and get it all dialed in and basically get the front end fully completed.
When we went to remove the front axle to be able to complete the welds for these lower shock mounts, we discovered a problem that Chris is going to describe.
So essentially, we tried to take this lower link bolt out and it hit the lower coilover mount. But we're thinking that it's because we put a little too much caster on the axle. Well, not too much, but Brian from 4-Wheel Underground said 8 to 10 degrees. And I think we are closer to 10 degrees. So essentially, we're just going to rotate this mount so it barely clears this bolt. Basically, we'll be able to take the bolt out and also have as much caster as we can get while keeping the shock happy. So as long as we make it so that this bolt can clear the shock mount, we should be good.
And for this side, the bolt has to come in from the outside in because you can't get it in from the inside out because of the pumpkin of the differential. On this other side, we do have the ability to put the bolt in from the inside out, but we still have to match both sides. So they're both going to be welded in a similar position on the axle. All right, we repositioned these lower shock mounts, and now the bolt for the control arm will slide through. And we made it to where it just barely makes it. We did the same on both sides. After we got done re-welding those lower shock mounts onto the axles, we went back to the front of the vehicle and did a whole bunch of welding. So the lower part of the shock tower is now welded on really securely. We have this small gusset on the front of both of them. And then we have a taller gusset that attaches the shock tower tubes to the frame near the engine. And then just giving you a shot of all the welding. We completely welded on these plates that support the shock tower tubes. And so you could just see there's a ton of welding that has to happen. And here's a shot from underneath, all of the welding. And the same on the passenger side, all the same welding. And I forgot to mention, we also welded in the bump stop cans. So those are all thoroughly welded onto these plates. And then we also finished the welding of the lower link brackets onto each frame rail. The upper welds up there are kind of tough to get, but Chris did a pretty good job. Get another shot from the back side on this passenger side, and then the welds on the underside of the frame. And same with the driver's side. You can see all the welding that needs to take place. This driver's side right near the fuel filter, that's really hard to get up on that top weld. But again, Chris did a decent job with the really tight access he had to get up there with the welding tip. Then we cleaned up both sides of the frames of all of the welding splatter with the Milwaukee band file and then the Milwaukee right angle die grinder. They both came in really handy getting all the splatter off the frame. Some of it is really hard to get to. You're not going to be able to get to it because it's tight access, but whatever. It's not a huge deal. But having tools like this, especially the band file, with the long arm, you could get it into those tight spaces that not even the right angle die grinder can get into. So this ends up being a really handy tool for fabricating. I'm glad I got this one. All right, Chris, now that we have all the welding done on the front end of the vehicle, we cleaned up all the splatter, what are we gonna do next?
All right, so the next step is essentially to get it all nice and clean and ready for paint, throw some paint on there, and then button everything up for the final time.
So when you say button it up for the final time, you mean we're actually gonna get this axle attached for the very last time? We're not gonna have to take it off and do something else?
Should be it, but no promises.
Okay, that's gonna be pretty sweet to have the front axle on there, both front tires on. It's gonna be a nice accomplishment for all the work it took to get to this point. We primed and painted everything. So we have the axle nicely primed and painted. We have the diff cover and the drag link and the tie rod painted. We have the upper and lower links are painted. And then we have the panhard bar painted. And this is the transmission skid plate and transmission mount. So before we get this axle put back on the front of the vehicle, we need to install the outer axle seals. And we're gonna show you how to do that. So here's the seal, and by analyzing it, the strongest point is right here near the center. A lot of times with the seal, it's on the outer edge, but you could see that there's not much support here. So we don't necessarily want to be striking out at the outermost part of the ring. We want to be striking somewhere more inboard where it's strongest. So we're going to use a seal driving puck about this diameter to apply the force right in this area to drive the seal into the axle tube. We've got this seal driven in flush. Now we're going to go to the other side and drive that one in. All right, we have the axle back on the front of the vehicle, got the panhard bar connected. We have the lower links connected on both sides and the upper link connected. And we have the knuckles installed on both sides. Now we're gonna torque the bottom nut and the upper Allen bolt to spec. And what is that spec?
The first one you want to do is this inner lower nut, and that's 100 foot-pounds.
100 foot-pounds.
Yep. And then you also want to make sure you use a little bit of blue Loctite per the instructions. Okay.
What size is a socket?
1 1/4.
1 1/4.
And you might have to hold the little Allen on the bottom.
What size Allen is that?
5/16.
Yay!
Drove her home, boys.
100 foot-pounds.
And that just drives in the taper into the inner C. You make the steering stiffness adjustment with this lower nut right here.
Next, we're gonna torque this lower nut to 60 foot-pounds, and we're gonna use a little bit of blue Loctite on it. The size of that nut is 1 1/16, but a 27 millimeter fits it well also. There it is. Next, we're gonna torque this 19 millimeter Allen bolt with the 1 5/16 nut to 80 foot-pounds. And again, we're gonna put some blue 242 Loctite on the threads.
242.
Hike.
Hike.
There it is. All right, we're gonna do the same torquing on the passenger side knuckle. Both knuckles are torqued. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna insert the axle shafts on each side. All right, here we go. The short side is going in. Just be careful when you're inserting it, you don't damage the seal. There we go. Slide it in easy. All right, we inserted the axle shaft on the short side. We learned a few things, got the locking hub installed, and now we'll show you the process on the long side. Putting a little grease on the shaft. Chris has a nice technique there. He's greasing that area where it's gonna be hitting the seal. Well, you really are a pro at doing that.
You taught me well, Tim.
Okay, he's gonna slide that big boy home. Just be careful going in that you don't damage the seal. There it is. Good job. Now that it's in that far, what we do is we install the unit bearing and then put the 4 nuts on the back, and then we use the unit bearing to draw the axle to its fully seated position. Because you can see the gap that's there. As the unit bearing drives the axle shaft in further, this distance between this little dust seal and here is going to decrease. Before we put the unit bearing on, we're putting this O-ring onto there. What we found when getting the bearing in is if we prop up on the axle a little bit, then it's easier to slide it home. So now we got to get the nuts on the back. We're going to use a little bit of blue 242 Loctite on the nuts. We don't have a torque value for these nuts. If we come up with one, we'll put it in the video description. But for now, we're just gonna use that German spec we all know and love, good and tight. We've got the unit bearing all cinched up good and tight, and now we're gonna work on getting the locking hubs installed. What's the first step?
So these are some special Lyle C-clip plier deals, and then you gotta start spreading it. Keep spreading it until it goes around the axle. Squeeze it and push the lever at the same time.
So how do you know that thing is in the groove?
See how those little side things are like notched right there?
Oh yeah, it looks like it's buried into the groove, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, now I see what you're talking about. I concur, I think it is in the groove.
All right, so now we're gonna install the locking hubs. I just got these worn ones. I'm not using the original ones because I didn't want to use the vacuum setup with the provided grease. Kind of just hit these splines up a little bit.
So you're just lubricating all those splines with the provided grease.
And the axle shaft splines a little bit
And
too.
the axle, okay.
Okay, then you grease these little deals up a little bit.
Slide it in.
And you take this spring looking thing, throw that bad boy in there.
Okay, the spring's in there. A little more grease on that.
Might as well.
Okay. Slide that in.
Probably need to spin the unit bearing to get it to line up good. Yep, there it is.
There it is. Okay, good job.
And then these little pegs go in the empty slots right there.
Where those like indentations are?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this, make sure you got the seal on there.
Okay.
Just kind of goes all together like that. And you gotta put this little tube of anti-seize, I believe.
On all the little screws?
And all the little screws so they don't get seized up.
Okay, you get the idea. He's gonna put the anti-seize on the little Torx screws and get them all started and cinch them up. All right, we've got both axles in, both locking hubs in. Now we're gonna reconnect the tie rod and the drag link. We have the drag link and tie rod connected. Now we're working on getting the PSC hydraulic ram connected to the passenger knuckle and then to the ram plate that we welded on. Now what are we gonna do?
Now I guess we'll get the skid plate on.
So here's the transmission skid plate that you saw us put together, and we have to bolt this plastic piece to the bottom of it using the Allen bolts. Not that complicated. We're gonna get this all bolted up and then we'll come back. All right, we have this plastic piece attached to the main metal skid plate. A couple of the holes were sticky. We have to get a thread chaser, which we don't have right now, so we'll do that at another time. But we're gonna get this under the vehicle, and when we get underneath there, we're gonna explain the additional bracketry that Chris welded on to the lower link brackets so this could mount up. So this is one of the mounts that attaches to the lower link mount that's welded to the frame. That's on the driver's side. This is the one on the passenger side. And Chris is going to explain how he went about getting these in the right position and tacked in place and welded up.
I put these brackets up and the bolt head kind of held the bracket onto the lower link bracket. I did that on both sides, and then I was able to bolt the skid plate up to this bracket right here, and I made the brackets even and straight with the lower link brackets, made it all kind of level as best I could, and then I tacked the brackets in place. And after that, I got the transmission bracket, which is this piece right here, and I bolted that to the transmission mount. And as the skid plate was in place and the transmission mount was in place, I kind of got it into a happy position where I liked it. I got the transmission where I wanted it, and then I tacked that onto the skid plate as well. And the rest is history.
Nice looking welds.
Thanks, bro.
That's a pretty good down and dirty how he did it. It's not a perfect science, but I guess we'll soon see how it all bolts up, how well he did.
Fingers crossed.
Okay, let's do it.
And then this plate has little nut capture spots, so you don't really have to hold the nut while you're tightening it from the bottom. And then you got this special washer that was provided for the front, and then this goes in the back part.
Okay, so washer in the front, that other plate with the recessed nut dealies in the back.
Yep, and so we'll just place a couple nuts up there. And we'll place the other one on the other side. Nuts up there too. And then the other special washer.
Glad you're doing the lifting, not me. You gotta fucking twist that thing. Not even close. Twist it like this way. Okay, that one started. Get over here. We got all 6 of them started, and then we've got the 4 bolts that are gonna attach a transmission mount to the transmission skid plate. So we're gonna work on getting those started. All right, we've got those 4 bolts started, and we're just gonna cinch all these up. The next thing we want to get on the front end of the truck are the Radflow coilovers. And before we do that, we want to charge them with nitrogen. In order to do that, I'm going to use my Power Tank Shock Boss version 2 portable shock tuning kit. According to the information we found, we should be charging these to about 200 to 225. As the pressure goes up, you should see this start to expand. There it is. It's getting wood. That's about 225. So we're going to do the same with the other shock. All right, now that we have the Radflow shocks charged with nitrogen, we're going to get the dual coil springs on.
All right, so the first step, you want to thread this ring all the way up so that it's easier to get the springs on. And these rings we won't be able to set until we put the springs on the vehicle. These will basically sit about 1 to 3 inches above this collar at ride height. You always want to put the smaller spring on first. In this case, we have a 16 and a 14-inch coil. For 4-wheel underground, he gives one of these smaller coils is a little bit lighter, which goes on the passenger side, and the heavier one goes on the driver's side to support my fat ass. So we're just gonna slip these on here, and then you wanna make sure the writing is facing the right way. Slip this little spacer on here, and this is the longer coil. And then the spring seat goes on last. Pretty much the same as the other Radflow coilovers that we rebuilt. And then the spring clip on the end. And then we'll just bring the spring seat back down. And then we'll get everything nice and seated in its position. And then we just bring this ring down to basically the point that it touches the coil. And first we want to set 0 preload. And so right now it still needs a little bit more before 0 preload.
Basically, you want to get that ring touching the upper spring to where there's not any up and down play with the springs, and the springs aren't rattling really easily. We're just going by a video that we watched, and it's not totally clear where 0 preload is, but that's basically what we got. So what are you doing with those silver springs?
These silver springs basically stop this from traveling. So once this hits these, your top spring is no longer being used because your top spring is softer than your bottom spring, and your bottom spring has more stiffness. And so once the top spring stops being used, it makes it like kind of stiffer, I guess.
So how do you know where to set those silver rings?
From the Crawlpedia website, it says once you set your vehicle down and it settles to ride height, these rings want to live about 1 to 3 inches above this spring spacer. Kind of want you to feel the preload because you did it on the last one. So
there's some up and down. I'm just gonna bring this down to where it's touching. There's no up and down anymore. Just gonna lightly wiggle it, maybe give a little more. That's about where I set the other one.
And then from there, Brian from 4 Wheel Underground says we want about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch more preload. And so the other one we did about 1/2 inch. This one will do about 1/2 inch as well between the 2 spacers.
So currently it's 2 7/16.
So it's right past 3/8.
Yes.
So
7/8.
2 15/16.
2 15/16. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So we're going 1/2 of an inch beyond the 0 preload.
There it is, 2 15/16.
All right.
Then we'll bring this ring all the way down. This is the lock ring.
Yeah, and so you always want to make sure you lock the lock ring. We don't have the Radflow tools right now. I'm going to order some.
I have some.
Not with them though. Okay, so now these are ready to go on the vehicle.
We've got the axle drooped really low with a couple hydraulic jacks. And before we get the coilovers installed, we're going to install the hydraulic bump stops on each side. How tight do you get these? Who knows? Good and tight. What size is that nut?
1 1/8.
He's just going to go by feel with this big 1/2 inch gear wrench ratchet. Don't go freaking too crazy. And he did put a little bit of Loctite on the threads. And we're going to get the other one installed on the other side. To show the install of the coilovers, I'm choosing to show what's going on in the engine compartment because it's a little more involved because of the reservoirs we have to deal with. Because the reservoirs ultimately are going to be affixed inside the engine compartment, not in the fender well. Here we go. So Chris is going to pass me the reservoir through the hole in the fender. And we're going to have the fitting for the reservoir facing the fender. I'm going to get the bolt started, and then now Chris is going to work on the lower connection. A lot of times the heim joint isn't oriented the way you want, so you could just get in there with the bolt or something similar to get it aligned and then slide it in. I'm going to have to raise the jack a little bit so he can get the alignment. Tell me when.
There it is.
Okay.
Okay, go up a little tiny bit more. Ah, there it is.
All right, we're gonna do the same procedure on the driver's side. All right, we're gonna get started with installing these Willwood brakes onto the front of his rig.
Okay, so first step, take this bracket and you put the bolt in from the back, lock washer, and then the nut. Same thing on the bottom.
He's using a Nipix adjustable wrench on the back and a 1/2 inch gear wrench ratchet on the front, 24 millimeter nut. What kind of spec are you using for that?
As tight as I can. Good and tight. Okay, now get the smaller long bolt, put that through. These spacers are going to be a little tight, but they'll go on. Same thing at the bottom.
Get the rotor on. Looks like the bolt is going to come close to the rotor. Kind of interesting. Not the easiest thing to do to get the washer and the nut installed in between the rotor and the knuckle, but Chris is persevering. At least I thought he was. Chris is going to tighten up that bolt nut combo with a gear wrench ratchet with the 14 millimeter socket and a open end 14 millimeter. Just get it good and tight. Now Chris is gonna install the brake pads. Has a cotter pin that goes through that captures the pads. Not the most state-of-the-art type of system. Okay, just gotta bend that over. Okay, well, we're gonna do the same with the opposite side. We're in the process of setting up the limit straps, and we've already got some progress going on. And Chris is gonna describe what we've done to this point.
So we got this bracket for this clevis mount welded onto the coilover mount tube. And the lower link comes with a limit strap mount pre-welded onto it. And so essentially we just link these two spots together, and that's our limit strap. And so we're gonna leave about 1 inch of shock shaft while the limit strap is tight, and that will make it so we don't overextend our shocks.
And so why are you leaving that extra inch? Is that because the strap could stretch a little bit?
Exactly. So if you're doing desert racing, you probably want a little bit more because you're going to be overextending your axle a lot more, and there's going to be more weight on the strap. But since we're just doing like rock crawling and slow stuff, 1 inch should probably be good for that. We're gonna leave these loose. Actually, we'll loosen these all the way down so we can connect it to the lower link.
Okay, so you got the adjustment nuts with maximum thread showing below. Okay.
Yeah. Let's figure out where 1 inch is on this shock shaft.
You're gonna mark where 1 inch is. Because right now we're at full droop, correct?
Yep, so right now we're at full droop. Marked 1 inch on the shock shaft with the Sharpie. And then Tim's gonna jack up the axle a little bit so that we can get the lower mount mounted.
What size bolt nut is that?
19 millimeter.
19 millimeter. Okay, he's gonna tighten that up. Now that we have the limit strap attached to the lower link, and while I'm jacking up, Chris is gonna be watching to where that Sharpie mark he made basically goes away inside the shock body, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And a little bit more right there. Stop.
Right there. Okay. So now you're just going to take all the slack out of the strap?
Yeah. So now you can release it. See how far down it stretches. Oh yeah. So we're going to need to go way back up.
Okay. So it stretched more than you thought, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to go back up and reset. All right. Chris made an adjustment to the limit strap, and we're going to lower this back down and see where we're at.
I don't see the mark, so that's a good sign.
So now basically what Chris is going to do is he's going to make an adjustment to where he lowers the limit strap to where he could see that Sharpie mark on the shaft, and that's going to get the 1 inch of safety that we're going to build into the system so it can't overextend the shock shaft and cause damage. So I'll give you a closer up shot of where Chris chose to put this limit strap mount onto this shock tower pipe. It's right above this triangular gusset. Now with all this thread showing, we could have mounted it a little bit higher, but it's actually pretty good because we don't have a lot of extra stud hanging down, which would maybe be more prone to bend or breaking. So it actually worked out pretty good. We're gonna do the same with the other side. All right, this is a big moment. We're getting the tires on the front. That's a big ass tire, Chris. Can you handle that thing?
Oh no, dude.
Good job. Okay, we're gonna get the lug nuts on and get both of these wheels hooked up. All right, all the lug nuts are on, and Chris is just gonna cinch these up just snug. We're using the lowest setting on this Milwaukee 1/2 inch impact gun. Hey, Chris, those look like a really nice set of wheels. Who makes those?
It's this company named Method.
Method. What model are they?
These, I believe, are the 703 bead grips.
703 bead grips.
Yep.
Pretty damn nice looking.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna get the passenger side one on now. Nice. This is a pretty big moment. Lots and lots of work went into getting to this point. The front end of this rig is now going to be supported by the wheels and the front axle.
Feeling pretty good, dude. First step in the long process. Now we just got to get the rear done. All right, let's see what she looks like, dude.
Nice. Oh man, that thing looks badass. It would look better if you get your fat ass out of the way.
Well, we got to get it off the jack stands first.
All right, so we're gonna jack this up and get it off of the jack stands on the front. Moment of truth. Wow, pretty damn sweet looking. Look at this thing. All right, this concludes episode 7. Join us in episode 8, where we show you everything you need to know about setting up the rear axle, getting it prepped, getting it under the vehicle with all of the 4-wheel underground brackets installed, and also getting the 4-wheel underground cantilever suspension system all set up properly. See you there.